This wife in coma hears husband whisper as plug is pulled, and she fights back. A woman was not expected to recover after she mysteriously collapsed and was in a coma for 12 days. With her organs beginning to fail, doctors in Lynn D. Brown Pelletier Swap's family made the tough decision to turn off her life support. Desperate for her to awaken, Mr. Pelletier Swap's husband begged her to fight, begging her to wake up from her comatose state. After receiving no response, Mr. Pelletier Swap had lost all hope for his wife's recovery. It was at this point that she suddenly awoke from her coma and spoke to him, an event Mr. Pelletier Swap has called a miracle. When Mrs. Pelletier Swap was found unconscious by her husband, she was rushed to hospital in critical condition. Doctors soon determined that Mrs. Pelletier Swap was brain dead, telling Mr. Pelletier Swap that there was no response to any testing and there was nothing else they could do. What doctors didn't realize was that Mrs. Pelletier Swap was not brain dead. Although she couldn't move or speak, she was in a state referred to as locked in, sometimes becoming aware of her surroundings. While doctors and nurses weren't aware of it, Mrs. Pelletier Swap could hear them discussing her condition and telling her family that all hope was lost. "I remember people talking to me," Mrs. Pelletier Swap told CBS 5. "I remember when people came to visit, my niece reading to me. I remember a doctor shining a light in my eyes and telling my family there was no response. I also remember the doctor explaining what's going to happen when they turn the life support off." When doctors began to remove the vital tubes keeping her alive, Mr. Pelletier Swap became desperate and began to beg his wife to fight back. They gave one more day for everyone to come and say their goodbyes. "On October 29th, they turned my life support off. The entire time my husband kept whispering in my ear, 'I need you to fight,'" Mrs. Pelletier Swap stated. Despite an organ team being on standby and doctors waiting for a time of death, Mrs. Pelletier Swap was frantically fighting to get someone's attention. "In my head it was very clear what I was saying, but it wasn't to them," Mrs. Pelletier Swap confessed. "I was finally able to get out, 'I'm a fighter,' which is what my husband was whispering in my ear." Thanks to Mrs. Pelletier Swap's fighting spirit, she's now on the road to recovery. However, Mrs. Pelletier Swap had to learn to walk and complete basic tasks again, and has also been hospitalized several times since her coma. Mrs. Pelletier Swap has undergone 4 surgeries and suffers from anxiety, panic attacks, and PTSD due to the incident. Despite her ongoing health complications, Mrs. Pelletier Swap's family are thrilled she's still with them. "I don't consider it a miracle," Mrs. Pelletier Swap stated, "but everyone else, that's how they reference it." After her ordeal, Mrs. Pelletier Swap has urged families going through similar experiences to not give up on their loved ones and give them the time to make their way back to them. Just because you're not conscious doesn't mean you can't hear. So you should talk to your loved ones if you're in that situation. They hear you.